I have the proof because I have a story that I found a copy of the story about in 1971. So that was my very first Cannes Film Festival. And in the story, I wrote about Irina Pappas, so she was there. Dennis Hopper, whom you really was unbelievable, covered in a dark beard, his hair all very bushy, almost unrecognizable. So he was there pushing Lost Movie, perfect place in Cannes. I remember most, I think, is just the sheer beauty of the place itself. Looking out in the water and seeing the boats and just the being on the Riviera. That to me was, I was completely, enchanted by it. But then, of course, and despite the fact that there are posters everywhere, big bosom women, or they're actually big bosom women everywhere, on the beach too. As we know, all that nudity. But it just was an incredibly beautiful place. I remember the most the screening of E.T. Extraterrestrial, because again, it was the closing night film. And this was, I think, I'm not sure exactly the year. You have to go and look that up. But what was so incredible about it, the screening was held in what was then the brand new Palais, and the audience just went crazy after it was over. And they picked up a whole group of men picked up Steven Spielberg and swept him out of the door, the entrance, and down the steps. And then, and it was perfect because it was just like, you see these coaches when they're whisked off after winning the World Series. And he was even wearing a baseball cap with his black tux. And it was just this amazing scene. And you knew right then that this film was going to become a cultural phenomenon. Well, I hate to admit there was an unpleasant experience in Cannes. Very unusual, but it happened, and this I think was about 1983, because we were in the Grand Palais again in the big theater, and all of a sudden I looked around and my colleagues, all of them really probably the toughest film audience in the world, so many of them were film critics, sitting there rather, their usual rather severe look. What are you going to do for me now? They're looking at the screen. And all of a sudden I noticed that they're like this, beginning to sniffle a bit, and I noticed that my eyes were getting kind of irritated and sniffly, and all of a sudden there was this announcement that we had to evacuate the theater at once. So we all sort of slowly poured out of the theater, and it was only then that we realized that we'd been tear gassed. What had happened was that a group of medical students, there were always, as you know, historic protests at Cannes, and this time I think it was the medical students, and they were walking down the Croisette, and but they had set up also rubber tires in the middle of the Croisette, and they were burning them. So there was the smoke coming from that, and the French tactical, I think they're called the tactical police force, because they carry the big guns, and they really were pointing them. They decided this was the way to disperse it, and they tossed out these canisters of tear gas, which unfortunately seeped through the theater. Interestingly enough, was Heat and Dust, James Ivory, and of course this lovely, sedate, beautiful film from India. Of course, I realized that the real drama occurred on the Croisette, or on these terraces of the Carlton Hotel, and also the Majestic. And so when I first was there that first year, there were two men sort of sitting there carefully watching everybody going into the movies. They never went into the movies as far as I could tell. And one of them turned out to be Dusty Cole, and the other was Bill Marshall. Needless to say, they were very friendly. They're Canadians, so they're very open and friendly to Americans. They said, come on, they said, join us, have a drink. So, of course, we did. That began my association with Dusty Cole, and I say it was influential because he started by saying, we're going to do a film festival in Toronto. And Roger Ebert dropped by, and he sat next to me. We both listened to them and said, really? That's, he said, that's nice, very good. Yes, and we're going to call it the Festival of Festivals. And I thought that sounded very grand and ambitious, but and I didn't think anything more of it. A year later, I get a call, and it's Dusty Cole. I said, it's Dusty Cole, and he said, well, are you coming? And I said, where? He said, Toronto. We're having our festival. And I was stunned, really. And so I felt I had to go, an obligation, and sure enough, went to Toronto the very first year. They had managed to round up about 100 movies. There was no, of course, stars there, no Americans there, and that the Canadian press hounded them for that and said, this is terrible. What kind of a festival is you don't have any Americans here? I ended up standing up at a press conference there and saying, well, you have to give them a chance and all this thing. And of course, Dusty adopted me on the spot after that. And Dusty ultimately became my sort of mentor and encouragement when it came to deciding that that I wanted to do this Lake Placid Film Festival, which I've done for 10 years, Film Forum, with Russell Banks, the novelist.